How exactly did I come up with the idea that Jarrah said that Parkes was the only station in the world to receive all the video signals from the Moon for all Apollo missions? It's very simple, actually. Let's examine how Jarrah can start with a true statement and derive a conclusion with an altogether different meaning by changing scope and substituting words with similar meanings.
When astronaut Neil Armstrong takes his first steps on the Moon, Australian stations will be the only ones receiving the television signal.
This was a pre-Apollo 11 newscast that is talking specifically about NASA's Canberra tracking stations. It doesn't mention Parkes because Parkes was not part of the original plan. Before the Apollo 11 mission, the plan was that NASA's radio telescopes, located near Canberra, were to receive the Apollo 11 television signal. But, due to a fire at their 64-meter dish in Tedbinbella, NASA went with their backup plan and brought the CSIRO-owned Parkes Observatory online. Jarrah, of course, fails to mention this small detail.
We know that the Australian radio telescopes were the only stations that received the television transmissions. This means that the only video footage that the world saw would have to come from Australia.
This is where Jarrah begins changing scope. The ABC newscast specifically stated Honeysuckle Creek, which is part of NASA's radio telescope complex near Canberra.
The space tracking station at Honeysuckle Creek has a staff of about 100, and all but a handful are Australians. However, the station and its millions of dollars worth of sophisticated equipment is owned by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the United States.
Jarrah never acknowledges the NASA-owned facilities at Canberra in his Exhibit D series, but instead switches to the broader category, Australian radio telescopes, which not only includes Canberra, but also Parkes. Also notice, he changed the words television signal, used by the ABC announcer, to television transmissions, plural.
Even the Soviets would have to rely on Parkes to see these telecasts.
This is another change of scope. This time he switches from the broad category, Australian radio telescopes, to a specific, Parkes. Effectively, he steps from the NASA-owned Honeysuckle Creek facility to non-NASA-owned Parkes simply by changing scope twice. Clever, huh? He has also substituted his television transmissions with the word telecasts.
So, if there was only one radio telescope in the world receiving these videos, then how could one verify whether the moonwalk videos were actually coming from space, or from pre-filmed tapes that the Parkes Observatory was relaying to the world?
Notice, Jarrah never mentions that he's talking specifically about Apollo 11. There was one Apollo 11 EVA. There was one Apollo 11 moonwalk video. Jarrah uses the broad term moonwalk videos, plural, which again changes scope, leading his audience to believe that the Apollo moonwalk videos, plural, came from only one station, and therefore they could easily be manipulated. This is clearly Jarrah's intention because he follows this statement with a broader claim Bill Casey made about NASA controlling all the communications data.
To create a simulation is really not all that difficult, because if all the input comes from NASA and goes to NASA, and you knew that was the case, all Apollo communications were handled from and to NASA, so they had complete control.
The fact is that Jarrah needs Parkes to be a NASA-run facility so that he can keep all the communications eggs in one basket and disqualify Parkes as independent verification that Apollo's transmissions were coming from the Moon. Notice how Jarrah starts with a pre-mission statement about Australian stations, plural, being the only ones planned to receive the Apollo 11 TV signal, and ends up saying that Parkes was the only station that ever received any signal from Apollo. This is yet another fallacy of composition, squared this time, and a straw man combined.
Or maybe it's just sloppy narration. Loosely, I refer to the Australian tracking stations as one, because they were all working together on the same project.
Loosely, he's combining the NASA-owned tracking stations at Canberra, a name he personally never utters during his entire Exhibit D series, with the CSIRO-owned Parkes Observatory, and calls them the Australian tracking stations. Again, he's changing scope. He thinks this enables him to disqualify Parkes because it's in the same category of Australian tracking stations as are NASA's radio telescopes near Canberra. Using Jarrah's logic, you could say that Australia and the United States are one and the same country because they are both partners in a little project called APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation.
There is a very good reason why the Australian radio observatories have the NASA logo posted on their sign. They are part of NASA's Deep Space Network.
There's a good reason why the Canberra tracking stations have the NASA logo on their signs. They were owned by NASA. NASA's 64-meter dish at Tidbinbilla, for example, was part of the Canberra Communications Complex. Parkes is not owned by NASA. The sign near Parkes Visitor Center does not have the NASA logo on it. And other signs around the Parkes premises do not have the NASA logo on them. Does Jarrah think nobody could look this stuff up to verify it?
Now, admittedly, in my original Exhibit D series, I made an error. Going from the information I got from the ABC News report, I said that the Australian tracking stations were the only stations receiving the Apollo 11 moonwalk videos.
Nope. He's simply changing focus again. Jarrah has a tendency to take general statements and make them specific, or take a specific statement and make it more general. In rare cases, he thinks he's able to pull off both at the same time.
So, if there was only one radio telescope in the world receiving these videos, then how could one verify whether the moonwalk videos were actually coming from space, or from pre-filmed tapes that the Parkes Observatory was relaying to the world?
Telescope is singular. Videos is plural. And I didn't hear him say Apollo 11 at all. It sounds like he is referring to more than the Apollo 11 moonwalk video here. By the way, Parkes did participate in later Apollo missions as well, so as a conspiracist, he really needs to disqualify Parkes for all Apollo missions.
I later learned that Goldstone Tracking Station, also part of the NASA Deep Space Network, was also in a position to allegedly receive signals from the moon at the time. I acknowledged this in my follow-up to Exhibit D.
This diagram shows the Earth as seen from the Moon at the beginning of the Apollo 11 moonwalk.
As you can clearly see, mostly the Pacific Ocean is facing the Moon at this time. And the only tracking stations in line of sight are Goldstone, Honeysuckle Creek, and Parkes, all of which are part of NASA's Deep Space Network.
Correction. Goldstone and Honeysuckle Creek are part of NASA's Deep Space Network. Parkes is not. And Jarrah's acknowledgement that Goldstone was also in a position to allegedly receive signals from the moon at the time is a moot point, since Goldstone is NASA-owned and, according to Jarrah, they were allegedly in on the hoax. So why does it even matter to him?
Webb knows this because I pointed it out in my response to his introduction of his new series, which I uploaded on May 9.
Really? Ooh, I'm squirming. How will I ever dig myself out of this one? Has Jarrah truly caught me with my pants down? Well, it's going to take a little more time than we have left in this video to find out. So, I think I'll pause here and pick up this particular topic later. Ciao, moon hoax conspirators, wherever you are.